times. You tested 7,000 people. And then they say they don't acknowledge these viruses circulate the whole world. And they say and publish, and it's still on the website, for SARS, the mortality rate is 10%. The mortality rate, right? And they had the same kind of numbers for this SARS was 3.6. So anyone listening would think out of 100, with SARS, 10 people will die. But no, the magic trick is that they tested 8,000 people and 774 died, right? But they don't mention that that's all that died in like 40 countries and nobody else died. So they call the mortality rates, which scares everybody. But the real thing is called the fatality rate, right? So this is a smoke and mirrors job, right? Because it only works with smoke and mirrors if something is not true. So the fatality rate is the number of people that die in that country or in the world for that period of time, a year, comparison to years before. So when I'm saying, so the fatality rate, the number of people that die in the world for SARS was 1 in 8 million, right? So they're still on the website going, SARS was a mortality rate, right? The same as avian flu, BSE. So they do small numbers, they advertise, that's how the magic trick works, right? Mortality rate 10%, you get a huge scare, you get a vaccine, big frightening, because they're priming people psychologically to be afraid of these viruses. But actually the fatality rate, the number of people that died in the world, which is a common sense thing, it's not related to testing, was 1 in 8 million. So the number of people in Ireland under 65 of this one is 1 in 500,000, but still they're reporting this mortality rate of 3.6%. So it's only when you look into it, it's like an emperor has no clothes, And what's happening now, we have parallel things that I'm working with Berlin, that they had 1 million people at the end of August. I mean, everybody is. They had 3 million in a rally about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Now, of course, the police came, even though it was really peaceful. But they are saying that 60% of Germany are waking up, right? And the next rally, which everyone is invited to, is in Berlin on the 10th of October. And they're going to camp, all over the center of Berlin. They're actually going to stay, right? And they want to have 10 million people. So we now have two parallel worlds, and it's a psychological experiment, right? You have the media going on as if the previous story was all consistent. Right? It's a killer, you need masks, social distancing, the elderly will be locked in their homes, 6 people, right? The government's bringing in policies. But actually, I'm saying you only need one country or two to actually go, no, wait a minute, have an election, bring in people that will go through the data, it will be exposed, and then those doctors and, the politicians and their advisors will have to be held to account. And what they're, at some stage, it might take a month, it might take a year, some country will go, wait a minute, there was actually serious issues with fear-mongering, inflating the statistics, the PCR tests are wrong. You just need that to happen in one country, and people like me will go, look, now it's already coming out. So they're still trying to keep us down. They still have hundreds of riot police, antagonizing people that just want to go and listen to nurses and doctors who've got fired for speaking. And then all the media is about, whatever instigated violence, as if we're all conspiracy theorists or whatever. But eventually there will be a tipping point. And partly why I'm so vocal and strident is, and I'm working with, people, lawyers, and we've now got 35 countries, is that if you call out something in May as a crime against humanity, or if you say that people died because it's contributory manslaughter, that people would know, and the crime of malfeasance, which is in the UK, it's 10 years in prison, means that if you're a doctor or a politician or a media person, you can't use the defense, you didn't know. Because if, like Professor Michael Levitt, the Nobel Prize winner, was telling the politicians how to resolve all this in January, and it was well publicized, and there's like 100, doctors, Senator Scott Jensen, all around the world, Judy Bukovich, Sherry Tempany, that the politicians and the advisors can't say then that they didn't know. And if you cause harm, which is suicide and putting masks on teenagers, isolating the elderly in their rooms, and you should have known, it's a crime of malfeasance in the UK, and it's 10 years in prison. Malfeasance, and it's also misprision, right? But this is 10 years, it's an actual crime, as well as contributory manslaughter. So you could technically say the politicians have contributed to unnecessary and preventable deaths, right? So I'm just saying why we're calling that out. So even the court systems are quite tricky, I will use that. But if if you have an international tribunal around the lines of Nuremberg, which we are now working on with, say, Canada, Germany, whatever, that you could actually, in an international law system, hold people to account. And then that is you cannot use the defense, I was only following orders after Nuremberg, right? So if there is criminal, if there are preventable deaths, contributory manslaughter, malfeasance, doctors and politicians and the media and the BBC, reporting things and causing fear actually causes death, right? Causing fear makes people stress. So just saying there is a level of holding them to account. And in Germany, if 60% of the population know that there's no basis for it, if there is an election, that is a good country. So they want 10 million people coming out on the 10th of October in Berlin. The whole world is invited. And then, they could call for an election. And they're going to camp out until they either end all the lockdown measures or they're going to try and move the society. So this thing will fall apart. Yeah. Now, there was a quick